This is your flip video for food chains and food webs. Everything that is on the whiteboard behind me, you need to make sure you copy down into your spiral notebook. First of all, we need to get this idea of what a food chain and a food web would do. And their job is to show how energy flows through an ecosystem. And in order to understand what that sentence means, we need to understand what this word ecosystem means. An ecosystem is the interaction of all the non-living and living parts of an environment. So if you think about Raleigh, North Carolina, outside we have a deciduous forest. That would be the ecosystem. A desert and ocean would also be examples of that. These non-living and living factors are given specific names. The abiotic factors, and this prefix A means non. Right, these are the non-living things, and these would be things like the air quality, the water, the temperature, and the soil in an ecosystem. And the living factors are called biotic factors. Birds, tigers, fish, plants, trees, anything that is considered a living piece of the environment. So every food chain has specific parts. You could either be a producer, right? And producers are something that make their own food. This goes back to our study of photosynthesis, and these would be the plants in an ecosystem. Their job is to produce their own food. All right, producers are always at the bottom of a food chain, and they get their energy from the sun. So they use the energy from the sun plus water and carbon dioxide in order to make glucose and then oxygen. If you're not a producer in an ecosystem, you're a consumer, and your job is to eat the producers, or you might actually eat another consumer depending on what type of consumer you are. If you are a consumer, you could be one of three kinds. You could be an herbivore. Those eat only plants, and those are called primary consumers. You could be a carnivore because you eat meat, or you could be an omnivore because you eat plants and meat. If you are a carnivore or an omnivore, you could be a secondary consumer, a tertiary consumer, or a quaternary consumer, depending on where you are in the food chain. So here is a picture of a simple food chain, and it's the same food chain written two different ways, but they both mean the same thing. So over here on the left, the food chain starts with our producer, which is grass. The grasshopper eats the grass, so the grass is giving energy to the grasshopper, and it would be a primary consumer. The grasshopper gives its energy to the frog, because the frog eats the grasshopper. That would be secondary. The snake would eat the frog, which would be tertiary, and then the hawk would eat the snake, which would be a quaternary consumer. Notice how the arrows show which direction energy is moving. Grass to grasshopper, grasshopper to frog, frog to snake, and snake to hawk. The same food chain is written a different way down here, but it's telling you the same story. Grass is our producer. It's at the bottom of the food chain. Gives its energy to the grasshopper, to the frog, to the snake, to the hawk. One thing that you will see in food chains and food webs, the arrows are either going from left to right or up. Arrows never point down, because the things at the bottom are always transferring their energy to the items at the top. So in a food chain, there are certain relationships that have to take place in order to keep the food chain alive. One of them is the predator-prey relationship. The predator is the hunter. It's seeking out that food, and it is going to be a carnivore. Or you are the prey, which is what is getting hunted. All right. You could have a gazelle and a cheetah. That would be a predator-prey relationship. You could have some animals that are scavengers. Their job is to eat what is left behind. All right, a couple examples of that would be a vulture or even a hyena. All right, and they will eat pretty much anything that is left behind from a predator-prey relationship. And then finally, your last part, which is a very important part to any food web, are your decomposers. Their job is to break down the dead plants and animals and return those nutrients back to the soil. Mushrooms are a great example, and so are bacteria. Those are excellent examples of what will break down dead plants and animals, add things like nitrogen and carbon back into Earth's atmosphere and soil. Now a food web, obviously by the picture, is a little more complex. A food web is just an interconnected group of food chains. All right, so this is a very, I want to say, simple food web. We're going to focus a lot on this picture here in class. But notice our plants are at the bottom. And then you have your primary consumers. These are going to be your herbivores that eat just those plants. And notice how as we move up the food chain, the fox actually has 5 different things that it could possibly eat from somewhere on the food web. Okay? A simple food chain in here would be the plants get eaten by the mice, which then the mice get eaten by the hawks and the owls. Another example, we could do that the insects get eaten by the plants, the spiders eat the insects eating birds eat the spiders, and then finally those birds are getting eaten by the snakes. So this would be a sample of a food web. It's just a big picture of one ecosystem and then all the feeding relationships that are in that ecosystem.